Hi, my name's Benedict for Higher Hertz. We're looking at the Kirchhoff EQ from Three Body Technology. I've been keeping an eye on these guys for a while, and I've been looking forward to doing this review in particular. I looked at Kirchhoff when it first came out, and in many ways I was quite impressed, but in some ways it just felt a little incomplete. And then not long after that, I started seeing, because I ended up on their mailing list because I tried a few of their products, and I saw that once this came out and people had started using it, they were getting feedback, and they seemed very on top of taking advantage of that feedback. And there were some small, but I think significant changes, which took the product from feeling a little like the crocheting was a little scruffy, so there were some holes on the side, to making a very tight product that honestly I think is a joy to use. Spending $150 or so on an EQ is not the first thing that I think of when I wake up in the morning, and have always resisted, including here, but I can see why this makes such a strong proposition. So, quick overview of what it is. This is a backing piece I threw together in moments using mostly low-hanging fruit Rex files, so it's not meant to be good in any way. Remember, if you want to offer your own work for me to do on these sorts of programs, we're delighted to, as long as you whitelist us for use. Let's listen. In the second half of the program, I'll actually go through and do what I always do and use the device I'm reviewing here, the Kirchhoff in this case, to beautify this, because at the moment it is sort of pretty flat and one-dimensional, and I know it can be better. I know it can be better because I've actually done it using this, but because I'm running the demo and nothing gets saved, when I save and reopen the reason, it's not there anymore. But that's fine, I understand. It's a pretty heavyweight piece of software, and they have to put some limits on it somewhere. So it's the usual that we expect now. What people consider the Pro Q3 approach to making an EQ. You make these points that you drag around, and then you can see them in the doohickey down the bottom and do stuff. And that's part of the way that that Kirchhoff has been received, and I think it may be part of what they set out to do. And that could have been a terrible noose for them, but I think they actually won. So there are plenty of people whose reviews are basically, this is the Pro Q killer. So I asked the question, is it the Pro Q killer? Bearing in mind, I never really liked Pro Q. I enjoyed Volcano when I reviewed it. But Pro Q and generally the FabFilter thing, I've never been in love with. They are very good at what they do, like very, very good, but I've never been in love with them. I've never felt like, oh, I want to take that into my workflow. There are other tools that people would be like, that I would rather use than the Pro Q or the FabFilter thing. It's a personal choice. But this, in terms of, personally, yeah, I get this. I want to keep using this. That's a winner. And if that's what it takes to be a Pro Q killer, it's definitely that. They've set out to kind of outgun the Pro Q, and I think in certain ways they have really done it. Definitely for me, in usability, they have won hands down. There's a whole lot of technical stuff. Go read their website about how they've, outmoded this kind of distortion and that and the other. I am never impressed by that kind of technicality. If you've genuinely done it, brilliant, bully for you. All I care about is, does it work? Does it achieve me a result that I like, and am I enjoying using it? Yes. So you can go read about all the technical stuff on their site and how they've got less freaky bad lines on their graphs than other people have on their graphs. Great. If they've done it, wonderful. But all we should be looking at is it a good tool to use? And I'm going to say yes. While it's not as pretty to look at as Pro Q or various others, and it looks a little bit more techy. It's actually far more of a joy to use. One of the frustrations that I have with the FabFilter stuff is actually as a result of their graphic heaviness. While it makes them look very pretty, somehow I feel like that's between me and what I'm actually there to do. While EQs in particular are highly technical things, when I'm using one, I am not interested in techiness at all. I'm interested in getting the result of what the EQ can do. Don't care how it does it. All I want is the result. It's art at this point. Art and technology are obviously tied together, but when making art, you're making art. If you're making art and going on about technology, then you're not making art. You are merely, well, hands down pants. And that's fine if that's what you are. But if you're an artist, you just want it to work. And somehow their less intrusive, less graphical approach, I find a real pleasure, with one exception. But it's an exception I don't actually have to use if I don't want to. Let's have a look at these cats. They're not super well known. I encountered them through when I was making a metal record that was not going to have guitars. It was supposed to have guitars. It was supposed to have a real guitarist, but, well, one real guitarist after another pulled out as soon as they realised that it wasn't going to be a formula record. Sad, sad, sad. So I did the obvious and looked at virtual guitar players. And the one that probably impressed me the most was heavier 7 strings. Not because it had 7 strings, but there was something about it I just thought that was a little bit cooler than the others. But ultimately I decided that the only way to make those things really fly was to actually effectively be a guitarist. But I think I had a little bit of contact with them at the time, found them pretty friendly, they were pretty cool. They released a graphic EQ, a 13 band or 31 or something, lots of little sliders, and I tried it, and in many ways I really, really liked it. But while I like graphic EQs, I find them a little bit pointless in reality, because this kind of EQ is far more functional overall. Plus, a big thing about the Kirchhoff is dynamics, which we're going to dig into later. So they're a cool company. Their other products, though, are very much focused on the Chinese market. I think they're out of China. I'd be amazed if they're not, because everything about them screams China. But they've got some Chinese instruments, which I've never tried. I'd be kind of intrigued to, and I probably should have, especially seeing I've made some quite Asian-sounding albums, but being me, it's all very synthesis rather than samples. So that's kind of what holds me off those things. They also have a analogizer plugin, which, again, honestly, I haven't tried. Something about the approach just didn't appeal to me, but Kirchhoff EQ very much appeals to me. Looking at the page for the EQ, I like the way this is done. I really like the way this is done. Equally, I really like the fact that there is a proper manual and it's pretty darn well put together. I haven't read it cover to cover, but there are no apparent immediate sort of Chinese translated to German, translated to Swahili, and then poorly mistranslated into English, which used to happen with synthesizers. And quite often that they were translated to German before they were translated to English, from Japanese to German to English. Like, why would you do that? But no matter. You end up with some funny translations, but this reads properly from the get-go. But the website shows what they've done. They even give you some links to get into the background of the math and the techiness of what they've done. I like that. I commonly complain on reviews that their secret sauce is hidden. I think often because they don't want people to realise that there is no secret sauce. There really is no secret sauce. It's all just architecture. Do you put the green brick above the blue brick, or do you put the blue brick above the green brick? Do you use a red brick at all? That's all it is, it's architecture. I know this from being a synth and effect developer myself. Not at this level, I can tell you, but architecture doesn't really have much in the way of secret sauce. But scroll through this. I was thinking to scroll through this here and talk about it, but there is so much in here, I'm concerned about the length of the review, but go look at the page. But they know equalizers will never be the same again. They knew by the time they were doing this, that this was potentially a hand grenade into the market. It's a hand grenade that will either change the market or someone will put a blanket on it and it will disappear. I hope it does not disappear, because I think out of all the EQs that I've looked at, this one somehow has something more, and it's not just about the technical stuff. And again, I'm saying it's not because I'm looking at whether their quality is better than somebody else's quality. Don't care. All I care is how it sounds. It sounds good, but as far as I'm concerned, they all sound good in their own way, unless it's something really kooky. So we'll run through the good and bad, and then get into the actual interesting part of the program. So what do I like about this? Well, I've really gone through it already, but bottom line, it feels incredibly practical and incredibly natural to use. I don't feel like I'm sort of having to try and work out somebody else's workflow. It just works. That to me is an absolute winner in a device. My favorite EQ, complex EQ so far, because I use the SSL style EQ in Reason for mix EQ, that's for your mixed tone adjustments. But if I need to get in there and get all kinds of slider happy, then is Q range, which is free and, well, largely ignored, which is a shame. This one would make me abandon that. The dynamic EQ stuff in here is great. And as I've said before, we will dig into that. It's incredibly detailed, but it doesn't feel overwhelming. And there's so much that you can do with it, and it works and it flows. Yes, if you don't know much about it, you may initially be like, but it doesn't overwhelm at all. And that's a real win. And as I've already said, the manual is a proper manual. I haven't read it cover to cover, but where I looked into a few things to be like, what's that? And there weren't that many that I needed to do, and none of them were fundamental. As in, I was able to use this fully without having to ask, what's that? What do I need that for? They were secondary things, or tertiary things even. But the manual gave nice, easy answers and helped me to understand what I was doing, helped me to use their product. Absolute aces, boys, girls, and indeterminates on your manual. I have to put some bads, or it seems like I'm not doing my job, but quite honestly, my first response was, what do I put? I haven't encountered anything that really puts me off this in any way at all. I did, when I very first used it, have to ask, how do I access the dynamic feature? The dynamic button is a little bit minimal. Once you know it's there, problem solved. But when I came back in after, I don't know, some months, quite a few months, obviously, time on the internet feels very strange, I again had to go, where is the button? So maybe a little bit of color on the button or something, I don't know. It's not a killer, but the response that I got was really pretty friendly for what appeared to be a pretty darn stupid question. And there is a question hanging over. There's no sense of saturations or distortions or anything inside this. We know they have the technology, hence my mentioning that they have some sort of analogizer, saturation, distortionation thing. They've got the technology, but they haven't put it in here. Question is, do they feel that it doesn't really belong here? Which I think is a valid point of view. Do they feel like it's going to be a 2.0 feature? Which is a valid approach. Get this right, get it all bedded down, which I think it pretty done well is, and then in a version 2.0, start adding the kind of stuff. Don't know. Is it a bad? If you're saying that that's a must-have feature for your EQ, it could be a problem. But I don't really think it's a problem, because what is here and what is meant to happen happens so incredibly nicely. Let's move forward to this in use. First, we will run through the feature set. This is important because it is pretty feature heavy, but impressively enough, it doesn't really get in the way. So we'll run around the outside. We've got the ability to access settings and what have you, and there's an initialize button. Aces for the initialize button. A/B modes, we can copy things and paste them and what have you. Keyboard, this is kind of cool. When we've got music playing, I can say, okay, I see this peak, there it is. Or if I know that my piece is in the key of A, which I think it is from memory, then it's pretty easy to locate one of these. You're not lumbered with it if you don't want it. It's there at the bottom. Inside the settings, you can have crosshairs and lines and what have you, if that helps you to locate. I felt that it was a little heavy. They obviously felt that it was a little heavy because they defaulted them to off, but they are there if you want them. But the keyboard, while not a thing I'd want to use all the time, I just realised that it scales. Big key, little key, which is fair enough because frequencies are logarithmic, so we have a logarithmic keyboard. I feel really sorry for Stevie Wonder on this one, but that keyboard is nice. There are then a whole pile of phase modes, which I'm really not going to get into. There's minimum, which is the default, and it runs beautifully and sounds beautiful at that. There's analog. This is all just about how the different phase modes work. Mix and linear. Linear gets ugly. You can't see it, but I've gone from a plug-in delay compensation of 4, which I think is coming from something else in here, to 2051. And that's just with low. If I go up to extreme, 32,771 samples of PDC. Yeah, no, that's not going to happen. Honestly, I see so much stuff about must have linear phase and what have you, and go listen to Dan Worrell on that one. I know it happens. I know that phase moves things around and what have you, but you know what? I know it happens. I'm just going to use my ears. If it sounds off, I'm going to do something different. But it is there, and it's all handled very, very technically. This one, next one, is a bit fun. Turn on the hand. Puts us into a slow mode, and if I go, yeah, look, I'm not loving what I'm seeing here, it's now given me a point. And a pointy point. So I can say, oh yeah, that's seriously not the coolest frequency I've ever heard. Obviously I can change that point, but that is a rather nice thing. Not unique, but it's pretty easy to just click it, find something. Oh look, even if the audio is not playing, it goes with what was there. That's nicely thought through. I didn't see that before, and I can click and I've got a point now, which is focused on that. Actually, it doesn't have to be focused on width, so there's probably some sort of rule as to how that comes in. Their name, there's a nice bypass. It's soft bypass, which means that if we're running at crazy PDC plug-in delay compensations, this isn't going to stop and lurch as it tries to recreate time. It'll keep the PDC settings exactly as they are and merely switch in and out. Very wise. I'm amazed how many plugins either don't have a bypass, and mine don't always either, to be very fair. But once you get to this kind of technology, they should have some sort of bypass, and definitely should have a soft bypass so everything stays exactly as it is, and so you're not asked to A/B through this kind of lurch, which is not cool. There's a phase swap, which on its own won't tell you anything, but if using this to do things like comb filters for making guitar cabinets, because I never use IRs, they're for the lazy, but if I'm doing some sort of full-on kind of guitar cabinet-y kind of a thing, I can flick in the phase thing, and whoop, there we go. So don't have to use another device to phase, because not everything gives you phase options. Oh, look, I can initialize. A was for auto gain, and thankfully it defaults to off, because while auto gain has a value, and I've spoken about that before, I don't want auto gain on more often than not. But if you are worried that gain is causing you to influence your decisions, you can press the pink A for auto gain and it will do it for you. Oh, shouldn't have deleted my thing before. Let's say I have this charming curve. Scale, it's not about the size of the screen, which we can move in lots of ways, and it all works nicely. Scale is what other people often call mix, but is more accurately. It'll go into negative, positive 200. So if we like what we're doing and go, yeah, look, that's cool, sometimes it's easy to over EQ, in which case, if you're a little worried about that, you can pull it back and go, okay, maybe it was right at 80%, or maybe I was a little too cautious and is better at 122%. Double click, gone. FFT, possibly not super well named, but very accurate, is actually our spectrum display. Ooh, sounds amazing. So we can change what we see. Speeds, ranges, so we can say, oh, okay, I only want to see 60 dB, right the way up to 200 dB. 200 dB of dynamic range. Good luck with that one. But as time goes by and we have higher ranges, okay, not sure where that's from. I'm pretty sure that will be accurate though. But we can also show different things. We can hide it completely. So if you want to be eyes only, we can see the input only, meaning that when I make changes, nothing changes. I can see output only, meaning it will show me what I'm hearing. And both, input, output. So in the background is what came in the foreground is what I'm seeing. Or whatever's different shows in the background. I like that, and sometimes it's really useful. Most of the time I don't want it, but sometimes it's useful. There's also the ability to tilt your graph. Now the reason that that's important is it depends how you like to see your display. Some people want to see that kind of 45-degree angle on their mix, and that helps them to feel like they've got it right. Other people are used to seeing their spectrum kind of flat. Well, it's perfectly flat, therefore it must be right. I don't much care, but I am just used to the no altering the tilt, therefore will tend to have a slope. But if you've grown up with that slope being desloped, and therefore you want to see it flat across here, you've got various options for flatificating this. Cool, nicely thought through. 117-bit, go read the site on that. There's some kind of massive upscaling option inside here, which you can use or not use, and then 2 times oversampling before you go, but I want, like 7 trillion times oversampling before I could possibly use this. Click 117-bit. If 117-bit, especially with 2 times oversampling, isn't enough for you, you ain't about the music. We can access our settings again. There's quite a lot of things there. Oh, including themes. There you go. You can re-theme it. Why would you bother? And this is nice. My whole world can become my EQ. There's probably a key command for that. In some ways, I prefer that over the resizing thing, because you resize and then you can't access things. So in many ways, it's nicer probably to keep this whole thing at 100% and then just be able to go whoomp for when you need to immerse yourself in it and back to whatever your default size is. Not unique, but again, just simply nicely done. We have got a decibel range. Now this is on, let's cut because it's much kinder. This will show us minus 30 dB, or we can be only seeing minus 6 dB. We can still move faster, but in different applications, we will want to see things differently. So when we're tracking, making our guitar sound, we might want to be very aggressive with our, because this is sound design. So we might be very aggressive, and 30 dB cut and boost, that's pretty hardcore. But if we're at a mastering level, we may want to feel like we can see things with a little bit more detail. That's 2 dB, 101.95, that's 2 dB. But if I want to feel like I can see with more fine grain, then I can move to this. Now 2 dB at a mastering stage, that's a bit hardcore. That's like 30 dB somewhere else, or maybe more 12 or 18. But if you want to be able to work more fine-grained, it doesn't change anything, you can go right down to 3 dB, which is pretty fine. Whatever you're used to, you can do it here very easily. It's not in the back and it's not intrusive up there, and you can easily see what your scale is. Others will have mass scrolls and what have you for scales, but they just get annoying. It's cool graphically. It's like, ooh, look at it fly. But I'm not watching NCIS. I'm trying to do art. So I like the way that happens. View bands and sorts, yes, down on the bottom. I've got a list to make sure I don't miss stuff. If we have multiple bands that may have gotten themselves there somewhat randomly, they will be shown down here. You've got various options. You can choose whether they're numbered, whether they're, like how much information they displayed by default. By default, they don't display a lot, which I think is great, because I don't want to be looking at this, looking at numbers. I want to be looking at this for helping it with feel. And this is nice. If I click off, I don't have to see anything at all. I can click on and I see my information, and I've got access to basic information here. When you click on something, it just focuses. All to be expected. I did kind of think, okay, but now they're all out of order, because I really got annoyed with that in particularly Volcano, that you couldn't reorder things. Right click, sort. So they're now all in order. Probably a failing. I haven't read enough of the manual, but remember, this is always about doing as much as I can without reading the manual, and if I can do almost everything, especially on a product this complex, without reading the manual, good job on the user interface. I'm not aware whether this is a serial or a parallel approach. Some EQs, what you've done here is cast in stone before what is done here. Volcano is like that. I think FabFilter stuff in general is. Nova, TDR Nova, is a parallel, as in this is happening and this is happening, and they're both independent from each other. I'm not sure what mode this uses, and I haven't seen anything to alter the way it happens. But I don't rightly care, because no method is inherently better than the other. You can always achieve the same results. But I like that we can reorder, because that's something I very much like with QRange, that there's a button there. It's a bit more visible than this, but this is not hard. You can reassign them, put them back in order, and there was somewhere else that I found that you could do it as well. Can't remember where. Yep, there, if you're right-clicking on one of these. So a lot of features in here. There's not one way to access them. There's several ways, but they're not intrusive or overly flowery. So if you want to be able to see what's where and what's happening, because sometimes you just visualize things better this way, then you can access that there. You've then got a pile of different monitoring options. So you can hear just the left, just the right, the mid, or the side, or turn it off. Once you've got one of these, this will flash. It's lit up and it will flash. It's not intrusive, but it will help you just to realize this is not what wants to be going at. It will reset itself after the plugin's closed and what have you. So when you close this, it'll reset itself, which is good because you don't want to accidentally send that to master. Although if you've been listening and made all your decisions in that mode, it will undo itself. But that is cool if that's the thing that you need to access. Not a massive fan or user of that, but it's there and it's pretty easy. Patches, you know my opinion on patches. Patches and mixing do not go together at all. There is a look ahead option. This is for the dynamic stuff. In that sometimes the dynamics can't see fast enough and you end up with not the result that you want. You can go up to 20 milliseconds of look ahead. that automatically adds 882 samples of plug-in delay compensation. That's in 1644, which is what I work. Probably not a thing I'm going to use, but if you need it, it's there. You can balance between mid and side, either through the width, which is mid side, or some people don't like that kind of method, meaning that you can just change the level of the side. So those essentially do the same thing, but they're different approaches. Here for if you like it this way, here for if you like it this way. Again, not massively into the mid-side thing, but it's all there, and it feels equally nicely delivered with no frou-frou, which is all really cool. And then we've got our final level. If you're not doing the auto level thing, then you can manually level, and this is a ring center thing. Generally not a fan of them, but I like that this is here. I didn't expect to find a pan or an EQ, but I do like that this is here, because I often do a lot of my more heavyweight, my more serious, large mixing moves before I've got to the desk. It's all digital, so I might as well do it here. I can either do it at the top of my desk with the big gain knob, or I can do it close to the instrument, and this is likely to be either before a drive, in which case its level is going to influence the drive. Not so much the pan, but its level is going to influence the drive. So if I've done something here that changes the way the drive works, I can control that here. Great. Or if I've got this after everything, which is where I'm more likely to have it, then I can say, okay, look, that's cool, but I'm just hitting my desk 12 dB above where I really want to be. So bingo, gain done. And I'm happy to have that option. I don't love units that come out and then they don't allow me to control my output levels, not because I'm chasing some elusive minus 18 dB stuff, just because I want to make sure that my levels are sitting nicely for the mix, for the way the story wants to be told. Plus, of course, then if they can be automated. To be honest, I haven't tried to automate this, but I should imagine it will behave. If not, I would report it, and I expect that they would resolve it within a reasonable sort of a time frame. Cool. All set. Now, we will just initialize this, because that's currently sitting across our masters, and get rid of it. This is the exciting part of the program, the bit that I look forward to. I know it's taken 33.5 minutes to get here, but it's a massive piece of kit here. Let's look at our mix. Let's just listen to this. And I have been good, and I've taken a pre. That's what you're hearing now. So down the track, we can do a total AB with less of the flick, 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 flick thing. So we'll open these up to show that they haven't been worked on, and as we close them down, we'll know that they have been done. Nice, easy way of managing things. Cool. Let's dig in. We've got our mix. I've set out basically our levels, which are okay, and a little bit of panning on the guitars. Note they're not 100%. It just sounded so naff. What we've got, just quickly run through them. Obviously, kick drums. These are just loops as much as possible, but I couldn't find a bass Rex loop that was actually in tune with the others. So, fairly thoughtlessly put together bass line, summing them into a bus. Send to reverb is on the bus, not on the individual channels, as is common sense. We've got an electric guitar line and an acoustic guitar line. They don't mesh as well as I would like if they were real players, but I threw this together. And then a very simple string sample. This is going through an instance of Hertz delay. There it is. Which, if we pull it out, just makes it almost impossible to mix. One of the things that you would note already, hopefully are noting, and I hear far too many mixes go out, people are like, here's my new song, and everything just sounds like it's flat, and there's no depth anywhere here at all, and that's what we're going to develop to a fair extent with our EQ, but to get these strings to even start to sit in the mix, they need to be pulled back, which is what we've done there with the Hertz delay, to give ourselves a little bit of time and dimension, just to allow them to sit back a little bit already. Otherwise, it was not really going to happen. Oh, the only other thing is I put some on the guitar, the electric guitar, because that's not much fun. That's it. We've got an instance on our reverb. Our shared reverb is, of course, the free Hertz delay doing reverb duties. And then we will have one on the master. So again, there's a fair amount to go through here, but if you're interested to know how it works, how it feels, also to get a little bit of a mixing lesson, let's dig ourselves in. I'm just hearing the reverb too much in the cans. I know outside of the cans that will sound different, but it's hard. I hate working in cans, but this is what we got to do here. So, what have I got? What do I want to do with this? Generally, I never want to do anything in solo, but I work a lot more in solo here to help you hear a little clearer. It sounds very formulaic, which is to be expected. So what do I think I want to do? I want to change this relationship between kick and snare. I want to make the kick sound a little bit clearer, a little bit more sort of like it's out there on its own. I can add points obviously just by clicking and dragging. I can then find myself different modes. There are a lot of modes in here, but for now this kind of works for what I'm looking for. That's obviously very excessive. But I'm using this to clear out a lot of what's above it. Yes, I've got a whole loop, but this is very common. High percentage of the mixes I'm sent, the drums are already mixed down, either because they've used loops or for some reason they don't want to send me like actual multi-tracks out of the drum program that they've used. And I don't much care so long as the drum mix is working. But we've changed our snare here a little bit. Let's get interesting. Dynamics. This is something that massively sets this device apart from many other things. I know it's not the only dynamic EQ. We looked at Nova, and I like Nova a lot. Nova was designed from the ground up to be a dynamic EQ more than an EQ. This looks different. Yes, once we find the dynamics button, we've suddenly got this extra stuff, which initially looks a little confusing. It's like, why have they got below and above? Well, mostly we just work above, so we'll turn below off for the moment just so that we don't feel confused by it. Detect and relative we'll ignore so we don't feel confused about it. We can see that we're going over threshold. This works a little bit differently. We don't see our ratio directly, it's just got a % of ratio. So they've set something, don't know, maybe it was in the manual, don't care, works nicely. I now set what I want to do. I can go up, I can go down. Now I don't really want to go down here because I've already gone down, I've already pulled some stuff out here. What I actually want to do is go up, because I want the body of the snare to come through, but I don't want it to be getting in those frequencies in the way with my kick. So we're putting some of that punch that was there back in, but also being able to clear a certain amount of that away. So that's the dynamic EQ thing, but we're going upwards. Again, not entirely unique, but the flexibility here, often the upwards thing, is kind of a second thought, or you can do a little bit of it. But here, they don't care which way you're going to go, how you're going to go there. But we can also tell it what we want to do when we're below our threshold. So I can tell it to fall, meaning I can set this there's before anything's done, pretty flat. We've got a lot more dynamic movement around particularly the snare. I'm digging that. Now I want to do something similar here. Oh no, I can't control that one. That's okay. I don't know why they precluded filters from having dynamic features, but that's why I've got this point here. I want to dynamicalize that one. Above the range, I'm going to push a little bit of excitement. We can pull our ratio back or increase our ratio. Now the range works differently. We'll see that more accurately when we get to the masters, but just understand it works a little differently. But it is cool. There we go. Now I'm getting a little bit more flat, which means I can even get rid of that. Although I don't think I want to. Control Z, I want it back. So if we bypass, it doesn't sound so much like here's a sample loop, because you can actually hear a kind of a flatness in between. Whereas now we've got all of these affecting each other, and that's changed that loop. Whether this is right or wrong, I don't care. I'm showing you what can be done. We can make this loop suddenly a lot more dynamic. What have we got up top that we might look at? Do I want more or less of that? Let's put this back in the mix. I've got to decide, do I want these drums to be dominant? Is this little piece about nothing drum driven? Or are the drums there to push the rhythm along? I'm going to go with push the rhythm along, in which case I don't like too much of that sort of snap kind of sound that's there. We've put a lot of dynamic in here and pulled some out here. Flat. Cool. Solo's better. And what, if anything, do I want to do with the top? I'm actually going to pull it back a little bit. Again, I can change to a different type. In theory, I probably should be using a shelf here. And you might be like, why are you reducing the trebles, the hi-hats? Because remember I said I don't want this to be a drum kit at the front. I want this just to be the rhythm section that's backing what else is going on top. And too bright, too papery, too pasty. So I'm going to move that back. We can put a little bit of dynamic on it if we want. I'm not going to put a lot, but now we can show you something different. By default, this uses the dynamic detection on what we've set. So what I'm hearing is what's setting the dynamic action. I can set it to free. So now the kick drum, let's just put that to flat. You can directly see the kick drum kind of brutalizing this. Before you say you'd never do that, well, there are situations in which you might want to do that if you want to enhance the groove a little bit, to emphasize the kick drum. See? It's changed the feel of our loop. So I can set that to somewhere else. So it just works directly on that. I could set it to here and say, okay, well, whatever's happening here, I want that to set what's going on. Or turn it off and it's just using the band as it sees it. There's not a lot of activity in that range. You've then got this relative thing. So relative means that, and this is complex, one of the issues with this approach to dynamic is that it doesn't necessarily represent the real world. As we kind of all know, if this was just a straight compressor, then it will be driven more by whatever's loudest than what's here. This is soft in level compared to this, therefore the EQ that's happening, or sorry, the dynamics that's happening here will be driven more by this than by this. Okay, that's obviously a solution from this approach. But that sort of separates things out. And I've spoken about this. This is the reason why multiband compression and what have you is to me a total no-no. Yes, it achieves a certain arresting kind of sound because we've broken the world. And we don't always want to break the world. So we can actually say, look, I'm going to allow a certain amount of what's happening here to influence what's happening here. So I've got my what is happening here on its own, but I want some of it to be happening relative to itself. So if I've got listening to the relative, virtually nothing's happening because my threshold is too high. If I go with introducing some of the relative, or 100% relative, as in it's now listening to this, which was like what I did here, so I can balance in between another part of what's going on. Cool. And I like that. That overall now is a lot more dynamic. Is it right, wrong? I'm never interested in right, wrong. I'm merely making some decisions and showing you how this works. Yes, it's pretty dynamic, but I'm at the sound design mode here to say, okay, how can I make this stand out a lot more? Flat and papery. Just suddenly we feel like we've got levels and layers in there. I'm gonna say job done. We can set these to sort, which was all pretty tidy already. So I'm happy with that. And we will next look at the bass. Now this poor fella's really struggling to come through. Easy to grab something and just go, "I'll fix it." No, it will not. This is where our little keyboard can come in handy. Seeing I believe this to be an A, we could say, okay, I'll go there. But I know that EQing the fundamental is not the wisest, especially seeing I've actually put the kick drum down there. So what I need to do is actually go one octave up. I want the first harmonic of this. Hear how that suddenly sounds smoother? Sounds like there's no bass, even though there's plenty there. Ooh, hello. Old mix engineer's trick, never forget that one. That's a beauty, because it now means that I can get rid of some of what's causing us problems. I need to double click or click and drag. I can change this to a high pass filter. Again, I just want to get rid of within reason as much as I can before it starts to cause me issues. Now I'm going to find there's a nice kind of a clankiness in there with our pretend Rickenbacker. Kind of a cool buzzy thing happening there. I'm going to dynamicize that one, because once we go above our threshold, that's going to give us punch and pull through the mix. Kind of flat and anemic. Cool. I don't see this bass in this situation as being in front of. So I'm going to allow that to stay kind of back. I'm not going to heavy EQ or anything. Something we could be tempted to look at, and I will show you because I've just got to remember to create this. There are different types, and a lot of you are going to be interested in these. These are, let's go high bell because that seems appropriate. There are a fair collection of semi-emulations of famous gear. This one appears to be the SSL E-Class mixer. Some of them have no sort of extra controls, they just are. Rather than go through every single one of these, high mid, this one does have a Q range. This is essentially the same as what's in Reason and is a nice actually that is quite cool. Let's go have a look at our points, put them in order so it's pretty easy to find. Wasn't as easy to find as I hoped. Actually, it's a combination, so I'm going to leave that in. I wasn't expecting to leave that in, but it's helped bring a little bit more of that clank in. These are interesting, but I don't know how much I would use them. Delighted that they're there, but if we want to go through and find something that behaves like a, let's say, a Neve type British N, a Neve, mid bell, then there we go. We can give ourselves a British Neve bell. These do not have any kind of saturation in them. They're very open about that. I don't know whether they were as open when they first started, but it was pointed out, and they were very good about going, yep, no, don't get the wrong idea here. They merely just emulate the shape, because what happened with a lot of these older analog forms is that the digital form is kind of perfect, but the analog forms were often wonky. So maybe it's not best to show them on something where I've got lots of things. Let's just get rid of everything but one of these. That one there. Actually, you can see that very clear here. That's wonky. So our center is here, but our perceived center is here. So a lot of the charm out of these is that they are asymmetric. If you are looking for an asymmetric form, either because you want to believe that it's going to sound nicer, and some of them really do, or you just sort of go, look, I'm looking at my symmetrical form, but it's putting too much weight here, and it's too even. I want to make it bendy like this, like what we see. You could either use another symmetrical form to create an overall asymmetric form, unsymmetric form, or you could simply choose something that already is not symmetrical out of the box. No right, no wrong there. It's probably not a thing that I would use a lot, but the fact that they're there is rather cool, and it's worth looking at. But I won't say to you to come in to buy this to get Neve EQs, because honestly, you just don't need them. So that's really bringing that kind of clank slap through quite nicely. I like that. So we're going to call that, we're going to go to our rhythm bus. Remember, if you've got drums and bass and you're not putting them in the rhythm bus, you're probably missing out. Mostly what I do on a rhythm bus is some EQ, but I mostly start with compression. I want to compress the two together to make them move together. I've got a dynamic EQ, but it's not really intended to be a compressor as such. But, where there's a will, there's a way. Let's find a solution to doing that. Let's take we know that the high and low pass don't do it for some reason, but that's not a problem. Let's use a shelf. For the moment, we'll set it to no action, dynamicalize it. Turned it off, that's why. Actually, no, I need to put it down here. That's what I need to do. Set that to nothing. You have to kind of work this out. This is a slightly abnormal usage. And I need to set my levels a little bit more carefully. Let's give it. Now you can hear that. That's a bit rigid in terms of compression. I can ease that by changing my threshold. But this helps you to see how this works. I can set my range. Whatever my range is, it's going to do its best to hit that based on thresholds. So it can be a very brutal compressor. That puts it up there with Molot. Cool, especially if we go nasty. Let's just, generally here I'm only going to want a couple of dB of movement. And it shows me here what I'm actually getting in gain reduction. About 1.5, I think. So we can definitely hear that's working and doing its job, but I might want to relax its attack time a little bit. Hear how that's still doing its job, but it's relaxed its attack time to make it nicer. Now here's the advantage of using a high pass or low pass filter. Sorry, high shelf or low shelf for this. Not the gain, the frequency. If I want to do the regular trick of reducing how much the big heavy kick drum influences the rest, I can simply move my frequency. Well, let's set that to about 100. That's what the ADHD limiting tool does. Flat. Okay, it's a little louder when we A-B, but let's give ourselves 1 to 2 dB of back. And that sounds nice. It's just given it more movement than we had before. That's what we're looking for. We're looking to make this mix move and have depth. And now it's got that. Electric guitar. Make me sound like Mike Oldfield. Okay, fair enough. Pull these out so they don't have to solo here. I've got to decide, is this going to be electric guitar driven, or am I going to let this sort of fall back so it just becomes a rhythm? People aren't going to say, oh, I'm listening to an electric guitar track, it's metal. Or they're just going to go, look, I'm listening to this melody, and there's kind of a cool rhythm in there. There's some rhythmic complexity, but they don't necessarily know it's an electric guitar doing that. That's the path I want to go down. It's not pretty in solo, but that's going to give us a little bit of cut. So I might keep some of that. I like that you can lock this into a solo mode, but I'm far more like that you can just quickly... That's what I mean about workflow. And it's great that I don't have to click it into solo and then click it out of solo. I can just drag this from here. I can choose to drag it here, or I can choose to drag it here. And it's just automatically done it for me. That's what software is about. So between those two, here how we've just got that little bit more cut. That's what I'm looking for there. Now I'm going to put something down here. I'm going to try a shelf in this case. And then I think I'm going to go with a high pass, because I just don't see any particular purpose to that being there. Okay, it sounds a bit warmer, but remember we've got a bass in here. We're not having our electric guitarist fight with our bass player. They can do that when they're on stage, not on a record. Nice. Let's see if I want to get dynamic, to get jiggy with what's in here. Let's look about just doing the obvious. It's subtle, but it just gives a little bit of movement. Because we've got samples which are just going to sound the same every time, this gives a little bit of movement. Yes, in theory, that movement's going to be the same every time too, but it's just a little unexpected, so it creates some movement. If we looked at ways to maybe LFO-wise these, then we can add another little layer of movement. But I'll sort of leave that to you. It may be excessive, but it just depends how rigid your MIDI sourced backing is going to seem. But I'm thinking that's probably nice enough. Acoustic guitar. Now we really need to make some decisions on this. We want the rhythm to sit back in the mix, but they've got to decide, what are we going to do with this acoustic? Let's bring our strings back in. It's very easy to feel like that we're going to want that acoustic to be as bright as possible. And that's a thing we could do. We could grab it and... oh, look how bright and pin sharp it is. I'm going to say I don't think I want to do that. Let's see what else we've got in here. I like that. This I don't think I like at all. As is common for acoustic guitars, they can be surprisingly bassy, but it's kind of a muddy sort of a bass. So I'm thinking I don't want that. I'm going to go with a shelf for now. Remember, this instrument is within the mix. It's not a solo instrument. This is not some guy busking, trying to sound like the whole damn orchestra. This is a part of a whole. So we need to make it fit like a jigsaw piece, not simply sit on top of everything else. Hopefully you can hear there that as we bring this EQ in, the bass becomes clearer. Its role of what it's doing becomes clearer. I don't think it's a great bass line, but it's about clarifying and making the most of what we do have. I'm going to do the opposite of what most people are going to say one should do, and I'm actually going to back this off a little bit. Because whilst it's like this, it's just too pin sharp. It's too unreal. It doesn't sound like a guitar in a room. It sounds like a sample. Now, great. Its pin sharpness is testament to the excellentness of its recording. And that is superb, because it's put here as a sample for us to use in who knows what situation. But I don't need to use everything that's there. There is no rule in the Bible that says because it was recorded that way, that's how it has to come out on the record. This sounds much more natural. I want this to feel natural and organic. We don't have any movement in here per se. Top's there, so let's see what, if anything, we might get out of dynamicizing that. I'm going down for the moment, so at least in headphones, which are very clear and brittle, that's sounding pretty nice. But what if I do something below range? Now that sounds very lively. And that's good. Our acoustic guitar is meant to sound lively. the different chords in their recording sound different from each other, which is part of why you should have a real player. So that sample, the line, now goes from sounding sort of flat and just stuck to the screen to having this movement in it, which is good. That's what we want. We'll look at adding a low pass. Yeah, might as well get rid of it. It clarifies the drums and bass a little bit more, which is exactly what we want to do. Now that may be wrong because I'm working in cans, but you get the concept of what I'm doing in that we can create this huge amount of movement, especially because, like, we can create good movement, and I showed you that with Nova, but here we can create a lot more complex movement because it's changing all the time, and that improves that sound from, because I say, sounding like it's just sort of a post-it note sticky tape to the screen in front of us to being something that's moving, and that pleases Benedict. And now we've got our last sound here in the mix. Now 12, this is going to be a long one, but there was no way it wasn't going to be a long one. Strings. Very dynamic performance. The Royal Idiot Society played this one. It's actually, I think it's a bass line. Yes, a bass line. Well done. That's nice tone. I don't know whether I want all of that. But it's nice to bring out this hair on string, because that's creepy. Because there's a rhythmic element to this, we might consider finding it's there. You can hear this little digit. So let's dynamicize that. I want that to happen fast. I also want to let go fast. Maybe not that fast, because it's starting to jitter. Actually, I know I need to slow it down. That's fair enough. More importantly, I have to see what happens in the mix. Yeah. Now we've added a lot of we've got other ways of approaching that. We can use our mouse wheel. Look, Ma, no hands. this one. So it's giving us the dynamic without giving us that sort of like, oh look, he's just pushed some honk into the mix. I always get the mixing of these wrong in headphones. When I come back to listen, I go, oh, yeah, that wasn't very good. So I expect this is wrong for overall level and what have you as well. At this point, let's go A-B, what we've got. So this is with all our EQs that we've done so far in, and that's with them out. There may well be level differences. What I'm asking you to hear is not whether that's better or worse. There is no purpose to this mix other than to show you possible techniques, because this piece of music has no story, no reason to exist other than to show you these things. So I can't say, oh, I'm mixing this because somebody murdered their girlfriend and left flowers on their grave, because there is no purpose to this piece of music. But what I'm hoping that you hear, and what I hope I will hear when I come back out into speakers, because cans can never give you this, is that the mix should seem to feel deeper and, as a scene, more rich than just these flat things, as I say, kind of post-it noted to the front of your screen. I think I'm achieving that. I feel like within the headphones that those instruments are not only working together better, but have a sense of space within themselves better. So rather than them all just being on top of each other like this, that they've kind of moved into an order, which is exactly what we'd be hoping to have achieved. So I'm going to say I've probably achieved that. I've got my reverb here. Let's pop ourselves into, or we'll just give you no reverb, just looking to fill things out. That is of course the Hertz delay, but we're not going to change that. We're just going to listen to it. I like this in Reason. I can listen to just this. Of course it sounds horrible on its own, but it's not meant to sound any other way. Now we're going to look at some other possible twiggery. You know, I'm not massively big on twiggery, but I'm going to do some. We can add ourselves a point, go to let's go to a flat tilt. So I can tilt my reverb to be more bassy or more trebly. Let's say I want to do a little bit of that. But we're going to look at stereo. It's not the most stereoistest of reverbs in the first place, so let's get a little interesting. We'll say that's on the left. So the left has got that curve. Now let's create another one. We'll turn that into a flat tilt as well. And we'll go the other way around. But we need to swap that to right. So if we're listening to just left, it's bassier. If we're listening to just right, it's treblier. It's excessive at the moment, but I want you to be able to hear the difference. So let's de-access that. Hear how our room has just widened out a little bit. We don't want to do too much of that, or our room is going to sound weird. It's going to sound gutted, like there is no center anymore. That's a bad call, gutted, centerless room. Therefore, we might want to consider adding ourselves another point. Let's put this one into proper stereo. So this is on the thing, and it's going to act upon both. And I'm going to turn that into a low shelf. There we go. But I think I might want a smoother cue than that. Last thing I want is a muddy reverb. Fair enough. Now let's add another one. This is the stereo one, so for the moment we'll add it here, drag it up here, so it's stereo. We can see that. Now let's, and again I'm not into mid and side as a general rule, but let's just go side. So this is just the sides, as in add here, not in there. And there's surprisingly little up there. Let's actually listen to that as though that were, let's swap that to mid, because this may not be working out the way that I hope for if there is no, and there's just no signal there anyway. But we can still use our air. I'll put it onto the sides. You want to see me put it on the side, we'll put it on the side. But I want that to be pretty darn broad. Yes, I could have used a shelf, but potato. Let's just get rid of that. All counts for nothing until it's back in the mix. Now, hopefully what you hear is that the reverb, the sense of the piece just suddenly becomes a little bit more dimensional, brighter, clearer. What we're doing is adding a little bit of tops here, not to make that reverb super obvious, but to add some brightness as the piece happens. So we've got our initial sound, rather than making that too bright, which is going to cause us a load of problems and make our reverb behave poorly, we can take the reverb that we have got from our slightly darker signal. Remember, I darkened up those hi-hats on the top of the drum kit and the acoustic guitar. We can add a little bit of brightness here. So what happens is the sound comes in and brightens up as it propagates as a reverb. And that gives us this nice feeling of bright, light, airy. If we kill no reverb, no EQ, EQ. There's just this very subtle sense of filling out and rising. Any more than that tiny sense, we've done a bad job. Unless you're really wanting to meddle with people. But this is the proising approach to be very minimal. You see, a lot of my moves are relatively small. I'm using this here as primarily a mix EQ. There are some heavy-handed things for sound design, but a lot of this is mix EQ. So again, we can go back and have a listen to our AB. Overall, should just have more depth, dynamics, interest in what we hear. It's not about changing this completely. If you've been sent this piece of music that somebody's recorded and then you just suddenly go, I'm going to change genre with it, there's something horrifically wrong here. Now we'll look at our masters. This is going to affect everything, AB. What do we want to do? Well, the first thing I'd normally be doing here is a compressor. I've got my compressor here, but I'm only using it to raise my levels. And we know that we can do compression here. Sneaky. And let's go with a low shelf this time. Yep, push that right up here. And dynamicize it. Above. That's not a shelf at all, is it? That's a bell. I thought I chose a shelf. That's the way. Takes a couple of goes to get yourself oriented on this one. Again, we've got that very, very rigid, brutal kind of approach to compression, but it shows us it's working. Onsets. We haven't talked about onsets. Onsets, oh, maybe we did. This goes between being RMS and peak. That's my understanding of how I read it. I'm delighted to have another explanation come on that, but from the way I read it, it seemed to be we can move between an RMS kind of compression math to a peak compression math. There's neither right nor wrong, and that's again one of the differences between ProQ and Nova. That ProQ, if I remember correctly, is a peak, and Nova is more of an RMS. This allows us to pick and choose. Good on you, Kirchhoff. We might just pull our ratio back a little bit. Cool. Now what I might consider doing is, not moving that, moving this down a little bit. See how with the drum bus I did it the other way around, so I showed you how you could have less of the bass drum affecting what was happening. There's no reason we can't do it the other way around. So this bit's not actually being compressed anymore. But unlike a multiband where you've got a crossover point, therefore things get warped, this is much smoother. Not the first thing that I would recommend to sort of say, okay, let's compress half our mix. Because you can hear how that sort of sounds weird. So see how that not only sounds more dynamic overall, the attack and release may not be quite how we want them to be. Let's look at something a little different. I'll say that's okay. I'm not going to worry about auto gains or whatever. But because I've done this way, we've kept our highs a little bit more open. Therefore, we've effectively clarified our highs at the same time as we are compressing. Rather than declarifying our highs because they got pushed down, we're leaving them less affected by the compression. But it's mild. It's you see that there's a fairly shallow sort of a curve here, so it's not particularly noticeable. It's not like we're warping the shape of our room in a significant sort of a way. So compression and our first EQ move done in one go. Thank you, Kirchhoff, for that. Let's look at if we find something that's annoying us in our... Let's say that worries us a bit. You can just pull it out. We could look at dynamicizing it. Let's get it so the shoulder's working. Just want to see if it's going to act significantly differently. That's interesting, it sort of doesn't seem to. Let's put the them into a sort. Okay, that's working. Let's give it just like a much bigger range. Be a bit. Aggressive. Oh, that's changed the wrong one. My bad. No wonder that wasn't seem to be working the way that I thought it should. Silly me. Okay, it is working the way that I thought it should. It's just I wasn't seeing a lot of differentiation between the overall compression and just this band that I wanted to. And I thought it should do this. But I was actually focused on the wrong thing. Let's take the bell out of the action. So you obviously got to be sure that you are focused on the right thing. That was my bad. We'll say that's all right. Back to this bell. All right, now we can tell that it is doing what I hoped it might do. I'm probably not making any win here at all, so rather than push through to be like, oh, how cool am I, I'm actually just going to make sure that that's not a happening thing. So I've got that. This one I will keep. Oh, yeah, there we go. But I'll just keep it as a static band because that makes sense. It gets some of the compression that's already happening, so it's not like it's going to end up being stuck, not moving, which can happen with Nova. It can be like, oh yeah, well that was not moving. But there's no right or wrong here. I'm not judging, just seeing how it performs. Now here's where I want to put a little bit of brightness in. This I will also again look at, do I want to dynamicize it? Obviously not that much. I've got to find the right point here. So you can see it's going down with the compression at times and sometimes just leaping up a little bit. It's a different approach to compression where you've got to be able to think in more layers. I'm going to say that's probably all right. Let's test with the un-EQ'd but still getting this master. Definitely different. Again, working in cans and with a purposeless piece, always possible to be achieving not much, but I just really like being able to see a thing in action and to also be able to show off, well, here's how you can use it, here's how it works with this. So I'm pretty darn pleased with that. It's a device that I said, or the final words bit, it's a device that I said right at the beginning I like. I think that their approach to how everything is laid out on the screen is really good. There are these little things, but they're not intrusive. Even the keyboard ends up not being intrusive. It's not there to say, look how great we are with our graphics department. It's there helping me to get that bit of the job done. It's pretty easy to switch things in and out as I want them or don't want them. It's very easy to focus in. Let's say my mastering here, I can say, okay, I can really quite clearly see what's happening now. I'm not much of a changer in that sense, because I like the one that rules all, and that way I see small amounts of movement, but I see the sense in having that option, and sometimes it might well be useful. I have not felt the need for oversampling or any of this kind of stuff. Does it sound better? Maybe it does. Maybe 2 times does sound a little bit nicer. No significant jump in CPU. There's a little bit with the 117, but I'd expect that. But none of it's brutal. If we went into our linear phase extreme, the exchange is a little brutal, but I'm not honestly noticing a big difference. And I don't care whether you think that's because I have cloth ears or because my headphones suck. I really don't care if I don't hear it, nor is my audience. Bottom line. Sorry, I started the bottom line and then I distracted myself by looking at, features that are worth considering. And I just think that it is the nicest balance of a huge amount of technical stuff that allows me to not really think about the technical stuff being there at all. I can merely use the features, call the features in or out as I want or do not want them. And that's exactly what I want. That's exactly what the computerization, the digitalization of studios should always be about. The things that I like least is that when we get into this kind of stuff, that these suddenly look graphic-y. But I see the sense in it. If they didn't look any different from this, let's just pull that out, then we would have to say, well, okay, it's harder to know which one of these we're using. There's nothing wrong with it being graphic heavy, but for some reason it almost puts me off using them. But at the same time, if they hadn't made them look different in some way, then then it probably would have been a misstep in some way. It definitely would have harmed their sales for people who are looking for pictures of Neve knobs. There's nothing like having a picture of a Neve knob to improve your mix. Yeah, let's just get rid of that one because it served no purpose. But so again, overall bottom line, I think that its workflow is just about as perfect as you could get with regards to an incredibly high feature set with a high sort of technology thing going on underneath that just lets me get on and do the job. The double approach, the double-sided sticky tape approach to the dynamic EQ, along with the ability to delaminate it from the actual source that we're using, got me headphone lead tangled, is really nice, but they didn't stop there. They then allowed us to make that relative to somewhere else. So we can be having much more complex form of math. So our math can be 1, 2, 3, 4 to 5 angles all working at once. And that to me is great because that's like life. You know, you've got the television program that you want to watch, but your wife want to watch something else, but your mother-in-law wants to watch something else, the kids want to watch something else entirely, and professionally you probably should be going out to watch somebody's gig. This is life. You've got all those things, forces exerting themselves on you all at once. And this is giving a very nice way of setting up all those forces at once. None of this kind of, oh, but we've got the AI neurotic network. We can set this up ourselves and have full control over it. Absolute aces in my book. So my final words is, if you are looking for a heavyweight powerhouse EQ that can do everything for you, bar saturation, which you can do elsewhere, then I think Kirchhoff is an absolute must spend time with before you just make the thoughtless decision of going off and buying Pro Q. Nothing against FabFilter. I think they do a darned fine job. They just don't float my boat. This one definitely does, and you're sure not making any mistakes that I can see or hear. I've not heard any bad words about this since the initial kind of like, yeah, could you? And they just went and did it. And they've done it with this really lovely sense of workflow. I hope you have found that useful, either in your exploration of, is this a device worth taking into my life and marrying, because this is the kind of EQ that's the way you should approach these sorts of things. They shouldn't be just a casual, I'll use them once in a while. Not that you necessarily should be using an EQ this heavy on your main mix, but you see here that I have, and if there was a way to, if I owned this and there was a way to make reasons say, okay, instead of showing you our SSL EQ, you can just press this button and it shows you this EQ instead, I'd be like, yeah, that's worth considering. So you can use it as your mix EQ as well, and I like that it doesn't over-techify anything until you want it to be that way, which makes it very nice to work as a mix EQ where you're looking for smallish moves more often than not. Anytime you're looking for big moves in an EQ, mix EQ situation, you're either wrong or you need to be thinking more, okay, now we need to go back to a sound design before we start thinking of ourselves as mixing. If you have any questions about this, not about Kirchhoff or Three Body, obviously, because that should go to them. As I said, I have found them pretty responsive and willing to engage if you are engaging on the right kind of level. They do seem to be chasing a professional person, and that's good. That's the way it should be with this kind of software. But if you have any questions, hit subscribe, please, if you haven't already, and type it on below. If it's a thing where I need to hear it before I can give you a sensible answer. Otherwise, I'm going to give you a vague answer, which is going to annoy you because I didn't seem to really solve your problem. If it's a serious problem with regards to your mix, probably you should be hiring a mix engineer rather than just trying to get free advice on how to do it. There are ways to hire mix engineers, that either to hire them directly to do it, or I know I've got a button which says you can just hire me for an hour. I'm not going to do your mix for you in that hour, but I can discuss your issue. But I am happy to broadly answer questions that benefit the community at large. If so, type it on below. If I need to hear it, I need to hear it. You need to link me to something that I can hear. We're on YouTube, so why not pop it up on YouTube? You can always put it as unlisted, so you're not spraying this out to all your friends. And that way I can go over and have a look-see. Anyone else who's wanting to understand can go have a look-see, and then they can read what I have put as an answer. Otherwise, go out, try this. It is a really stellar product in a sea of products that are me too or not super well thought through. This is professionalism in action, and I am super pleased with that, which is why I was excited to be able to do this, because there's quite a lot of Me Too stuff I just actually declined to review. This is one I've been looking forward to reviewing for some time. That's enough of my blabber. You make sure that you have a great day.